Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Wait, Are These Guys Friends? I am Mike, and I am here with Randy. And Randy, great news. First off, how are you?
I'm doing wonderfully, Mike. How are you?
I wanted to start with some really exciting news.
Oh,
I'm
yeah?
going to vomit because to get this recording session in, I tried to eat dinner and start this with you, and you saw me horfing sushi before we started recording. And do you know, like, when you eat rice too much, like, the rice is now expanding, but I'd eaten so much that as we're starting the open, I'm just like, I'm going to throw up. I'm going to throw up in front of Randy. Randy's looking at me on the webcam, and I'm going to horf right in the webcam, and it's going to be bad.
What did you watch, Mike? My dinner coming
Yeah.
back up.
Actually, it's what you're going to watch. That's what you're going to watch.
I did the complete reverse where I didn't, I pushed off anything because I was running around doing a bunch of things right before we started doing this. So I have not eaten anything. So you will be throwing up your dinner and I will be passing out from exhaustion from not eating. So it'll be great. What a duo.
I was going to say, what a team we are. And you may think, why are these two idiots forcing this in? Because we didn't record one last week. We had to skip a week because we just had a lot going on. I was busy and out of town, and Randy was on a vacation. How was your vacation?
It was very nice. We did a little Caribbean cruise and got a chance to do some really fun stuff. I know I sent you some images and fun things going to
They were
Jamaica.
highly inappropriate, and I don't think your family would appreciate what you sent me.
Not those ones. Those were that
Oh,
was a different time. So, but
oh,
no, it was very nice. Some much needed rest and relaxation, get away from everything, and interesting, different cruise line than we had used the last time we went on a cruise a couple years ago. And it's funny how you start to draw your kind of pros and cons. You go, oh, okay, well, if we do this again, there's certain things I'm definitely in on, certain things I'm not so sure that we would be looking for. So it's interesting to build what your things are because the first time you go on one, you just don't know what's what, and you kind of learn a lot of things about it. So it was interesting to continue that education.
I've always been terrified of cruises because I feel like there was a rash in the early 2000s or 2010s where there were issues with cruises. I don't know if the technology was developing or it's just that things happen in threes. So it happened once and a bunch of things happened around it. But I'll always think about, like, I just call it the poop cruise, which is where there was that one ship that got like stuck off port where they couldn't quite get where they needed to dock and they couldn't quite empty everything into the ocean. So like the poop kept backing up on the ship. And I just feel like my luck would be I'd wind up on a poop cruise where I'd be like, what a nice 2 weeks. Now I live on this boat with my poop on the poop cruise. And it sounds like a bit. I swear it's not a bit. I've genuinely, like, it makes me pause to think about doing one of those.
Fair. I've been on 3 cruises in my lifetime and have never remotely come close to enduring anything of that sort.
Okay.
So,
I did look up
which means you're due.
yeah, no shit. I did look up which cruise the one that I'm thinking of specifically is. It was the Carnival Triumph in 2013.
Hmm.
There was a week cruise to Mexico and back. There was a fire. The boat got stuck and trying to get people in and out. Basically, with the power down, they weren't able to flush everything. So, so you got stuck.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a poop cruise. Everything just backed up while they tried to figure it out.
I would be curious to do a little bit more deep dive sounds disgusting, but
Was
the
this a Carnival cruise that
uh,
you were just on? Tell me the
it
truth.
was not. It was not.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
won't say specifically, but like
But it was
not that it
not a
matters,
Carnival
but
cruise. Yeah.
correct. I would be curious to see though, because the way that a lot of these cruise line fleets are, they have older ships, and then even some of them they're trying to refurbish the older ships. So even though it looks newer on the inside, it could be refurbished. I'd be curious to see where that Carnival crew, like that. What'd you call it? Say it was.
It
Which
was the
was the name of the
Carnival
ship?
Triumph.
Triumph. Okay, I'd be curious to see what it was at the time. How it was that one of their older
Oh.
ships. Maybe and
Was this because it was named after Triumph, the insult comic dog, and this ship was there for him to poop on?
to poop on. Yeah, not
Oh,
well.
see, I just
And
got there. I just tried. I've peaked. The podcast can't get any better today. We take 2 weeks off, and I come back with the best joke of my life? Probably. Probably. I
that's
really don't have much of what we watched for myself. I was in New Orleans all week doing a show around the Super Bowl. I was not there for
hmm
the Super Bowl, both because I was not working it, nor do I care as a fan. So I could have, maybe I could have tried to stay. I don't care.
I will say,
Yeah.
as a giant sports fan, you didn't miss much. It was quite the blowout. It was fly Eagles fly all the way. They annihilated the.
I talked to you throughout the Super Bowl because I
Yeah.
straight up just asked you. I went, Randy, which team do I bet on? You went Eagles, so I just made a bunch of Eagles bets. And that made the night exciting because I was able to text you and be like, hey, why doesn't this happen? And you'd be like, leave me alone. Before we just move on and maybe dive into the main topic, did you watch anything?
I did actually. So in the sense of the cruise departed from Florida, so I flew from where I am down to Florida and then back, and had a chance to watch a couple movies on those flights that I've been meaning to watch, just because there were a lot of times I feel like you look through all the movies, you're like, oh, this is just the same crap I've seen over and over and over again. But Blink Twice was something I was sort of interested in seeing. I was like, oh, okay, that sounds sort of fascinating. It's Zoe Kravitz, her directorial debut, I believe. I would say it's attempting. It has a very much a Get Out vibe. It very much feels, if it's not influenced by it, it takes a few things from it. But without giving necessarily, it's not exactly like it. So without giving everything away, it is interesting. The twist that comes about.
Don't say it. I don't want to know anything.
No, no,
Actually,
no.
don't
It
even
comes
give a
about. Okay,
timeline. Yeah.
okay.
Like let's
Which comes about in the second half of the movie.
all right, there we go.
That's not. Yeah, it's um is interesting. Like you don't necessarily, something is going to twist, but you don't know what the twist is. So it's a nice surprise. And some kind of interesting people show it. Just there's other people in it that you're just kind of like, oh, this guy, like Christian Slater's in it
I'm looking at the
randomly.
cast.
Haley
It's
Joel
really
Osment,
stacked.
yeah.
Yeah, Kyle MacLachlan, Gina Davis, Aaliyah Shawkat. This is gonna sound silly, but there's a couple of lower name people too. Like, did I just see the guy that was in like 3 of the Scary movies? Yeah, Simon Rex.
Yeah.
Yeah, like just ran. What a weirdly stacked cast.
All kind of, yeah, interestingly thrown together. Fun movie. So just it's I would check and encourage people to check it out. And then the other movie, and I think I mentioned this to you, I think we had seen it before, but it happened to be on. There was a very random uh gathering. I don't know what the word is. Grouping of movies available on the cruise ship. So if we were just getting ready or whatever, we'd throw on a couple of these different channels that were just running through these different movies. And one of them happened to be I think it was from 2022, the Weird Al, not biopic, like fake biopic. Is it biopic or biopic? I don't even know.
I've always just said biopic, but I have heard
Okay.
people say the other. I personally have always said biopic, but that's
I'm with you,
not
Mike.
having any real
Biopic.
influence there. Yeah.
The one with Daniel Radcliffe is called Weird, the Weird Al, like the Al Yankovic story. Um, Obviously not, and there's very little rooted in fact in this movie, and that's kind of the point. It's supposed to be over the top and crazy, but it is a very fun watch. My son really got into it and spent the next better part of 48 hours singing My Bologna, um, for better or for worse. And I forgot how much of we had seen it before, and I forgot how much just fun it is. It's just an entertaining, turn your brain off for an hour and a half would be enjoy the kind of insanity that it turns into.
Does your kid know Weird Al? Has he listened to Weird Al? Is this his introduction to Weird Al?
I think this was his introduction to it because he did start asking about it. We didn't get into it as much because he kind of moved on to something else as soon as he got home, but that is something we should deep dive.
Casually toss on Bad Hair Day and see what happens. Just, start weaving it in. See what goes down. I've got tickets to see him in June. I'm very excited. I can't wait to see him.
Very cool.
Yeah. I did a tour a couple of years ago where he did the Vanity tour where he played a lot of B-sides, and that was great. But this tour apparently is the first time in I think a decade where he's like, I'm playing the hits. It's hits, it's hits, it's hits. It's everything you want to hear.
What constitutes a Weird Al B-side? Like I Lost on Jeopardy or
No, it's Jackson Park Express is the best example. I fucking love Jackson Park Express. It's one of my all-time favorites.
I have no idea.
Do you know Albuquerque also? Do you know the song Albuquerque? It's one of those.
I don't.
Jesus, Randy, come on. So
Who's,
these are
the
his
song Albuquerque? You got anybody who sang it? Anything?
Yeah, the Weird Al song Albuquerque. That's
no,
what I mean.
I don't.
So these are the songs that fans really get into. Usually on every Weird Al album, you have like 2 or 3 of your classic parodies, a popular song or whatever. You always have a polka medley, and you always have at least one really, really long, insane story song.
Okay.
And they're like 5 to 8 minutes long minimum, and they just go anywhere. They're fucking insane. And
Okay.
Albuquerque is a very, very popular, famous one from, I believe, the same album that the Force Awakens, the Star Wars one, the American Pie Star Wars song,
Yeah. That's your
whichever one.
Anakin guy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's, I think, was the story song from that album. I remember Larry is one from Bad Hair Day, but this one is from Mandatory Fun, the 2014 album. And it's so long and so big and so epic. When I saw him do it in concert for this Vanity Tour B-side, he brought out an orchestra. And this song is like 11 minutes long. And
Oh
it's
my.
just never stops going. And it's just so good. And it's all about this interaction between a guy and a girl on a bus. And that's it. It's just a
Hmm.
song about all their interactions on a bus. And I can't do it justice without just saying, if you're hearing this, and I'm going to look up the actual length of the song. Okay, I looked it up. It is actually 8.5 minutes long. That is still a
Okay.
chunky song, but it is called Jackson Park Express. In fact, there's a great YouTube version that when I was looking up, I've seen this and I've looked up. There is live at Red Rocks, Weird Al
Oh
doing
wow.
Jackson Park Express. Go watch that video. That's when you're like, what do you mean by a B-side? That's what I mean by a B-side. That's what that tour was. But this one is apparently going to be all the hits. Very excited.
Very cool. Is it like, the Flight of the Conchords song Jenny? Kind of similar vein, just longer?
Very similar. This
Okay.
one is much more involved. I mean, it's Weird Al, right? He gets a little more
Yeah,
up
yeah.
than he always had, I think, about 2 steps more energy than the Flight of the Conchords did
Yeah.
in a lot of
Nice.
songs. And
Yes.
because of that, it tends to track accordingly.
All right.
But all that
Sounds like I
said,
need more of a deep dive on Weird Al. Fair enough.
you really do, so you really do. I can give you started. We'll talk offline. I don't got to make this everybody else's problem, but I will get you into some places. And like I love the albums. Everyone knows a lot of the singles, but when you really get into Weird Al's albums, there are some gems in there that are just so funny and so fun. You're
Hmm.
utterly ridiculous.
Noted.
You know, you always give me music recommendations. I'm going to insist
here we
on a
go.
couple that you listen before next week.
We've turned the tables.
How the tide turn
I don't have any comic recommendations, sorry.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. Is there? I realize I took us on a journey into actual music there. Anything else you want to say in his movie, or move on to the main topic?
No, it's just I would again, one of those ones that if you're looking for something where you're just looking to watch something and just enjoy it, it's very much worth your time for that. Like, it's a nice, I believe it's on Apple TV right now if anybody has Apple TV or Apple Plus or whatever that service is. You can find it there. It's a lot of, I don't know, I enjoyed watching it again. I had seen it already and enjoyed watching it again, to the point when we got back to our house, my son looked up on Apple TV Plus to find it and watched it again.
Nice. I love that. That's fantastic. Well, let's transition over then. It is February, and I believe only a few days after this episode comes out is the 50th anniversary special of Saturday Night Live. It's SNL 50 year. February is a big month for Saturday Night Live. You and I had been going back and forth about how can we do some SNL content, a little extra. We have a couple of ideas. One idea I had was maybe too much. I was like, we're going to tier list every cast member. And you were like, I'll kill you. And I was like, no, we can do it. And you're like, no, we can't. And so we were going back and forth on Marissa, and you, bless you, peacemaker, finding the middle ground. You were like,
I'm a diplomat.
What about just Weekend Update people? And I was like, that's a really good idea. It's manageable, can still hit a lot of things that we love. And so we are going to transition into talking about Weekend Update and Saturday Night Live. Here's the deal, folks. We are not going to rank individual anchors unless that is all they were. Like, Seth Meyers is going to be taken several times. He had different eras. We're going to rank Seth Meyers alone, Seth Meyers with a partner, Seth Meyers with a different partner. Norm is all-encompassing. Norm is just Norm, for example. We are looking at the eras, not just the people. Seth Meyers could be in 3 times, as I say, but is one era of his better than another era of his? He doesn't get ranked. His eras get ranked. I hope that makes sense for everybody. we are going to break down our tiers. And now, as usual, a tier list, for those who are not familiar, goes from an S tier, the tippy top, oh my gosh, best, all the way down to an F tier. What are you doing here? F as in fuck you. We have had a little fun as
Or
we
fake
have
news.
there. Oh, see, there you go. For our tiers, we're going to start at our tippy top tier. And these are pretty much all catchphrases and bits from the show. But Mr. Dennis Miller in the late 80s, early 90s had his,
That's the news. I'm out of here.
well, if you are the absolute best, that's the news. Moving on down, the main catchphrase of all time for Weekend Update. In my mind, I associated it with Jane Curtin starting it, but Chevy started it. Chevy to Jane. They got away from the 80s, but it was brought back for Tina Fey onwards.
Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
Then stepping one down, our B tier is Germans love it.
Which once again proves my old theory. Germans love David Hasselhoff.
Moving on down, our C tier is And You're Not, because obviously things start to get a little bit negative for Mr. Chevy Chase.
Good evening, I'm Chevy Chase, and you're not.
Then right down could be with, I believe, was it just Seth and Amy, or did they do this with other people? But
Really?
is our D tier?
Yeah, I think Seth did it on his own sometimes, and then every once in a while, like they brought in like Jerry Seinfeld once. He did it with Kermit once. So like it was one of those deals. So it's just like but most of the time it was Seth and Amy. Yeah.
Okay. And then going on down one more, one of the all-time classics that everyone quotes to this day, our E tier.
Jane, you ignorant slut.
And then as much as I love Norm, our final dead tier. If our top tier is That's the News, then our absolute bottom tier, and to be fair, this has taken on a real connotation in recent years, not just from Norm, but it's,
And now, the fake news.
as I'm reading this out, maybe we should have gone with something else for that F tier, because that plays a lot differently in 2025.
Yeah. It's
We're going to lean into it, but please know it was not that kind of fake news as I now read this out loud. I have a lot of regrets in my life.
This is not a political proclamation. This is just
No.
quoting Norm Macdonald.
Oh my. But let's get started. We're going to start with the one and only from season 1. We're going to start with Chevy Chase. He was the original anchor. He set the template. If you've seen the movie Saturday Night, you'll know also that Lorne designed Weekend Update for himself. And it was as they were approaching air and he was, having to produce this insane show and things were going, kind of all to hell around him. He looked at Chevy, who was a writer, and he's like, "You're in. This is your segment. It's you." And what do you think about Chevy Chase? Do you have to put it of its time? Does it hold up? What do you think? What did you think, even if you look at it of its time? What do you got for me, Randy?
So I may be ranking this a little bit higher just because of the context of he gets the good fortune of being the originator, right? Like, but someone's got to do it. So you get to get put in your place for that. The person to start it, we still talk about And You're Not, even though he only did it for a season. I think a person we'll get into later owes a lot of his delivery to this person. I think there's something to be said there. And my initial thought, and you're welcome to shoot it further down if you like, is A Pleasant Tomorrow. I can't put him all the way at the top, but I would put him second from the top.
I want to talk it through. I think I'm with you. I want to hit a few points. And why I think you're right. Because he actually did a season and a half. It would have almost been a full 2, but he got hurt midway through season 2. There's the famous bit where he called in a couple of sketches, and they did the 3 girls, Jane, Gilda, and Lorraine, did the Motown style Get Well Chevy song that's in a lot of clip shows. That was all when he was hurt. That's actually when Jane Curtin took over for the first time. She filled in. And then when he decided to leave anyway, because he was going to be a movie star, she took over at the end of season 2. He did almost a second full season. But he got, I'm trying to think how to say this. Let's look at it for the show first.
He became Chevy.
There it is. He set a lot of good tone. But I guess what we got to think of is he rode the goodwill from this for a long time, even when his movies weren't doing very well. If he came back to SNL, he was on Weekend Update, at least as a guest star, for a long time. When he had his ill-fated show in the 90s, his talk show, whatever else you want to say, they had a Weekend Update style bit. He is well-known, well-regarded. to this. So what do you think about? I think you also have to look at. You can probably rank them there because of the history. I also want to look at a lot of the recurring bits for all of these people. How well do their bit players, do the people that were around them hold up? I think of, for him, he had 3 main recurring gags. He had Generalissimo Francisco Franco was still dead, which doesn't play now at all.
Right.
I don't think I would have known it was, I didn't know it was as a kid when I saw this in reruns. Now I should Google that sometime. He has the phone call bit to open the show where he would be pretending to be on the phone and it was something else. And then the all-timer that they bring back for every single anniversary show, Hard of Hearing with Garrett Morris, where he says a news story and Garrett Morris just yells into the camera, "Hello!"
Which is a great bit.
It is a great bit, but do you give Chevy any extra credit for any of those, or does any of that get him the bump up, or does he stay a pleasant tomorrow?
No, I don't think so. If it was revolutionary and something that I would say I had to know about or just absolutely loved. And I don't know who wrote those, candidly. So if he wrote those, maybe, and it was well known he wrote those. But as much as that's just great casting picked out of what they had to utilize that role, and it works really well with Garrett Morris. So I think we're good there.
I agree. Pleasant tomorrow is Mr. Chevy Chase.
Okay.
We will move on to Jane Curtin. We've already addressed the fact that she took over in the second season. She'd filled in for Chevy in the second season. And for whatever he had started, the genesis of what Weekend Update would actually be and become starts with Jane Curtin. It's a little drier. The news takes a little bit more actual precedent than just random one-liners. They're actually talking about stories. They're bringing on a lot more, I think, analysts than they were during Chevy. You got to think about the people that she had. When you think of Jane, regardless of her co-host, so we'll get there, you have Rosanna Dana. You got John Belushi's commentaries. You have Emily Latella. And there's a lot of guest characters that are showing up on Weekend Update when Jane Curtin's on the show. She would host the rest of the original era of SNL. She would have 2 co-hosts. She'll have season 3 with Dan Aykroyd, season 4 and 5 with Bill Murray. But season 2 was all Jane Curtin. Here's my question. If we're ranking eras, how do you approach her on her own? I think it goes down a bit because I don't remember her being alone. I didn't remember the fact she was ever alone. So, my bad. Sorry, Jane Curtin.
I think you're right. I think this is almost like and you're not, it's just because we don't remember it, right? So I think that's I know we did that as a joke, but that kind of makes the point where we're just like, we don't really remember this much. I'm sure it was fine just because she was such a skilled performer in this format, but I don't remember it as much. So I think that's where I like it, unless you have negative or positive connotation.
Even if there's really, if it turns out that one of the really famous, Gilda Radner, Rosanna Dana bits was from this era, I don't necessarily think that plays into it because it could have in our minds been from any of her 4 seasons.
Right. And
her
what
alone is such a non-factor.
What is the banter there, right? Other than just being like, you misheard what they were talking about. Never mind. I don't know if that requires a lot of, chemistry to do.
Exactly.
Pull off.
Also, incidentally, I want to push on my nerd glasses and,
oh boy.
Oh, Randy. I said Rosanna Dana, and that was Emily Littell that you just quoted. Thank you. Thank you very much. Never mind was
okay.
Right. Emily was the old lady. Never mind. Rosanna Dana was what? The talking.
Didn't she? I thought Rosanna Dana always got stuff wrong too. But okay, maybe.
Oh no, she did, but it was the way the catchphrase you said was from the other.
Got you.
So yeah.
Sorry, Gilda Army. Please don't murder me in my sleep.
You dumb motherfucker. Sorry. But we move on to the first pairing, a pairing that in my mind, which is a good sign for this one, lasted more than a season. I was convinced this was more than one season. This was only season 3, Jane Curtin and Dan Aykroyd, which Point counterpoint immediately. Jane, you
Oh.
ignorant slut, will ironically get it further than the ignorant slut marker. But it's really interesting to me to see there are so many bits and banters and tosses that they do where it's a lot of the same joke and how they interact with each other, but it all plays well every time.
This was the first time too, and like I said, I don't remember as much about Jane Curtin, so she may have introduced this a little bit better. Chevy was doing shtick in a news format. Jane Curtin, I think, was reading, jokes, news. This is the first one that I thought felt like two news anchors delivering something in a sort of ridiculous environment, and just, I don't know how often Aykroyd ever broke. I feel like he was really, really good at not doing that. And so and same with Jane Curtin, I think, for the most part. So that felt really serious, and it felt more like news being delivered. And that's when the punchlines that were ridiculous coming from something that sounded very serious made them even funnier, in my opinion. So I think this escalates them because they bring that vibe to this whole thing. And then, like you said, point counterpoint is worth like 2 slots by itself. It's so good. It's so memorable.
Before we rank this one, I am going to advance us once to talk also about Jane Curtin and Bill Murray. These don't have to be ranked in the same spot, but we have to rank both of them. But I have to talk about Jane and Dan in relation to Jane and Bill, because Jane and Dan is instantly higher because I remember Jane and Bill, but in my mind, Jane and Dan got 2.5 seasons, and Bill Murray was maybe that last season after Dan Aykroyd left, forgetting that it was really the opposite. Dan Aykroyd wanted to get back into more sketches. They felt like they were wasting him on Update. And to be fair, they probably were, because he did so many little character bits. Bill Murray did actually kind of lend himself better to Weekend Update with his dry deadpan delivery and his sarcasm. Bill Murray is hilarious, but he is less a character performer than Dan Aykroyd is. Getting Dan Aykroyd back out to the main cast was beneficial.
Overarching, I would say in a vacuum for Weekend Update, I think it's a different story.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yep.
So, but also Bill Murray had recurring Weekend Update bits that I don't remember Dan Aykroyd ever having outside of Point Counterpoint, and they did Point Counterpoint without Dan Aykroyd. Bill Murray always had his movie rankings and his Oscar polls and his shit like that. That was always popular enough that came back when he would guest star and guest host later on. So, if you're looking at the last 3 years of Jane Curtin, 2 with Bill Murray, 1 with Dan Aykroyd, what's your gut reaction for where you're placing those 2 different eras?
So I'm curious because I think we may conflict here, but I, just based on hearing your
saying
comments about some of them, So I had Jane Curtin and Dan Aykroyd as A Pleasant Tomorrow, and then Jane Curtin and Bill Murray as Germans Love It.
I am definitely Pleasant Tomorrow for Jane Curtin and Dan Aykroyd. I might have gone down to And You're Not for Bill Murray and Jane Curtin. Because
candidly, that might be just like my liking Bill Murray.
I love Bill Murray.
That might, in my own head, maybe that's why it starts a little bit higher. I think I could be talked into agreeing with that.
The way I look at it is I love Bill Murray and he's very funny. But when I was rewatching Weekend Update segments prior to this, I watched a bit of every era, right? I found it unmemorable. I found it to be less good than with Aykroyd, probably better than her alone. So I would put it, even if it's And You're Not, it would be ahead of her by herself.
Yeah.
But I just couldn't I wasn't drawn into them as anchors. I enjoyed their banter with their analysts, but I just wasn't getting there for me personally. The fact that you can't say I hadn't rewatched anything. To me, you should be able to rank this list maybe just on memorable bits, right?
Yeah.
I want to have watched more. I want to understand more. But you, I think, as a super fan, could rank a lot of this without having to rewatch anything, just because we've dedicated entirely too much of our own personal free time to it.
Very true.
Because of that, and the lack of memories and the lack of insight I have on Bill Murray's time in my mind, even though I knew it was there, it falls down into an And You're Not. That's why I hit that.
I think that's right. Where it's someone who is such a memorable Saturday Night Live performer, if he's not as memorable in Weekend Update, that's saying something.
Yes, it is. And again, yes, he was obviously a very memorable performer. He had a lot of great bits. But I would go Pleasant Tomorrow for Jane Curtin and Dan Aykroyd. And then I would go And You're Not for Jane Curtin. Now, here's the question. Do we want to organize these tiers as we go, or do we want to organize them at the end after we've placed everything?
I think the last time we did a tier, we did at the end. And I
Yes,
think
we
that was
did.
easier than trying to, because then we get back and forth on a lot of different stuff and we hop around. So we'll save it for the end.
Works for me, but I wanted to check.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Now,
Oh boy.
Yeah. So I actually have a lot of thoughts here because this was a real dark spot for me, like it is for most people as we advance to Charles Rocket. And the real catch is I had put them in here, and you can tell me if we should ignore it. I did put in Charles Rocket and Charles Rocket with Gail Mathias because they did technically exist in two spaces, but it's all over the course of one season. They did half the season with him alone, then they did half the season where they teamed him up with Gail Mathias. This is the legendarily bad, disastrous 1980 to 81 season, the Gene Dumanian year, the one where everyone but Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo got fired year, that year. And it is going to be tough. You have to address the fact that Charles Rocket's life never really recovered after SNL. He did take his own life. We do not need to get any, we're not here for that. A lot of things happened after. He was in a great episode of Quantum Leap, just putting it out there. But we're going to just talk about Weekend Update and the foibles and the show. Anything else is something else.
Yep. Okay.
So, looking at this, I think immediately, did you rewatch any Charles Rocket in anticipation of this?
I only
watched
found
some today.
one, and I watched that. So it was that one.
Okay. I went to Peacock and I watched a couple of episodes on there where you never know how it's going to turn out for those 80s episodes on Peacock because Lauren gets real willy-nilly with the cuts. You'll show up and suddenly you go to Peacock for, season 5
17-minute episode. What is this?
There it is. It's like, oh boy. So I watched what I could. And I have thoughts, but I'd love your gut reaction on Charles Rocket, who, by the way, is the only Weekend Update anchor to have ever actually anchored the news.
And that was the point I was going to make as well, and I think that is evident. So he is fairly
not
comfortable. No. But as an anchor, he is fairly comfortable sitting there. Like it is not shifty-eyed and all that other stuff. However, it's almost like he was playing it too straight.
Yes.
And
he forgot to be funny.
Right.
Writing aside, ignore the bad writing, ignore the bad production. He was treating it like it was the news, but not in a winking way.
Right. And what made Jane Curtin and Dan Aykroyd so great about it is they had that beat. They knew when to emphasize a certain word, or Dan Aykroyd would race through it, like with that pitter-patter delivery that he had, and just it all made sense because he knew when to lay out. This was, like you said, you're following it's like following the teleprompter. It felt like Ron Burgundy. It just is he just is reading the thing in front of him, and this obviously suffered from not great writing to begin with. And so if you're not funny and not selling the material and it's not that funny, that's a bad combo.
So I have, and I'll get into why, but I think both of these entries, him and him with Gail Mathias, probably both have to wind up in the fake news, right?
I
both
think
of
so,
them do.
Yeah.
But I'm going to give her due, and hear me out.
Okay.
I think that she goes just above, paired with her, goes just above him.
It broke up the monotony.
So I watched an episode. I watched 2 with her, and I wrote down my thoughts, and this is what I got, okay? And it's a little wordy, and you're going to be like, why are you talking this much about Gail Mathias? No one's talked this much about Gail Mathias since 1981. I don't know why. I watched, what was the bit that you watched, by the way?
Gosh, it was a couple days ago. I'm blanking on it. I don't even remember it. It was like it was just normal news stuff. It wasn't even.
So I specifically sought out and watched I didn't watch all of it, but I went and skimmed through the last 3 episodes of the 1980-81 season.
Okay.
I watched the episode where he got fired because Charles Rocket got fired for saying the F-bomb on air. And can I tell you, to this day, having never really taken the time until recently to look at this, I was convinced he had done that on Update. He did not do that on Update.
No, it's a Dallas sketch, right?
Yes. Well, it was not even that. It was the goodbyes. He was almost through the episode. It wasn't even a sketch.
Oh, really?
So it was being hosted by Charlene Tilton, who was on Dallas. And he was pretending to be JR having been shot for the credits, like the goodbyes. And she looks down and she goes, "Charles, you were shot. How do you feel? Is everything okay?" And he looked at the camera and goes, "I'd like to fucking know who did it." And then he got fired and everybody got fired and it was a whole thing.
There you go.
In my mind, that had been on Update. But I watched that Update, and this is what I thought from it, is that I did write, boy, can you tell he was a news anchor because of everything we just said. But for her, I think that her issue was the writing. I thought she had charisma, especially against his very dry delivery, but the writing is the 1980-81 season. It's bad. She did what she could. She's better than he is, but she never had a shot. Go watch a bit of her stuff. She knew the material was bombing, and it felt very Norm in her following, she repeated the joke. She smiled at the camera. She stared at the camera beat after it bombed. It wasn't done like maliciously or overly meticulously. And I wound up not hating her because you could tell she knew these jokes were bad.
She's not scared of it, though.
And she was just out there. It was all terrible. But for that reason, I feel like she is a punchline as much as he is, because he at least gets the credit of that guy who got fired for saying the F word. And I don't know. There was something about, I felt the need to watch some more of her actual tenure and give her due. There you go. Not that it necessarily matters, but there's something about it. Also, that was the one season Gilbert Gottfried was a cast member, and he did a pretty fun correspondent bit on that one. He was like the Treasury Secretary, talking about like if you narc on somebody as a homeless person, you get food. It was this weird. It was very of the time with politics I don't understand, but it was entertaining.
Then was Gail Mathias's like big thing? Did she do like a Valley Girl thing? Was that her big?
Oh, I don't remember.
Character. I thought she had like that was her one.
I have not a clue. Let's look at that up.
I don't think she ever brought an update, but
it was her and her friend Debbie, played by Denny Dillon. And I got her and Debbie Dillon confused when I was starting my research for this. I was convinced Debbie Dillon was the anchor with Charles Rocket, and it was her. So
gotcha.
The only other thing I was going to say is that I was surprised when watching the episode that with all the cuts they make to the Peacock shows, perhaps because it's famous, the F-bomb is there. You can watch the F-bomb on Peacock. The whole bit is in the episode.
The one that burned everything to the ground, of course. That's what.
Very, very surprising. So just the last thing for those seasons.
Yep.
Before we move on to the next era, the next episode was actually hosted by Bill Murray, and the one after that by Chevy Chase. So they actually Gail didn't show up for the last two. They did retro throwbacks. They even brought back the original Weekend Update set where Chevy was there.
Gotcha.
So there you go.
One more. I don't know. As I was just looking at something really quick, it caught out of the corner of my eye, and so I went to her IMDb. Gail Mathias, the voice of Bobby's mom in Bobby's World, the Fox Kids show. Yeah. How random is that?
I'm glad she's at least working into the 90s.
That's right.
Great job. Get it, girl. I respect you. I'm proud of you.
Unbelievably random there.
But now we're ditching Weekend Update. This is a Weekend Update tier list. That's a lie, because we're moving on to the SNL news break era, which is only season 7. But they ditch Weekend Update. They bring in Brian Doyle Murray, who technically had co-hosts in both Mary Gross and Christine Ebersole, but they were a couple episodes here, a couple episodes there. They didn't have any sustained run. So Randy and I were talking. We made the choice to just rank Brian Doyle Murray.
Yep.
And yes, that is brother of Bill Murray. He's the head of the Caddies and Caddyshack. He's the psychiatrist in Ghostbusters 2. If his brother's in something, there's a good chance he's in it too.
So, he's Chevy Chase's boss in Christmas Vacation.
There you go.
Noah Vanderhoff in Wayne's World, the owner of the arcade.
You know him.
Yeah.
So that said, while you know him, I watched 2 of his episodes this afternoon. And I just was so bored. I was so bored. Wildly unmemorable, stumbles over his words. And what struck me, tell me if you get this vibe when I say this. He was a writer with the famous name, so they stuck him in there. But at the end of the day, he's a writer with a famous name. He can be a good writer, but he's not a good anchor.
I am amused by his voice in general. So like it's one of those things, listening to a certain person's voice. So I am slightly hooked just by that. But as you said, once you start actually taking in the things that person is saying, you're like, okay, there's really not much here. And it's that's how I feel about him. I love a lot of his characters and stuff in movies and just a lot of the fun things that he does, but his voice is, I think, kind of unique, and so I am interested by it, but at the same time I'm not interested by the material he was delivering.
The best bit of his era wasn't even a bit they continued. They did it for a few and then they stopped it. For the SNL news break sign, they would start the segment and the sign would break. It would news break. And then they even got away from that. It's weird because he should be better, don't you think? Based on the pedigree, based on the style, based on... Do you feel like he should have been better than he was, or am I barking up the wrong tree?
I don't know how seasoned he was at this point, right? You said Caddyshack, but
this is definitely after Caddyshack.
No, but I mean, but what else? That's my point. Like, how much other stuff has he got into? Everything else I know him from is a later movie. So, I don't know. It's weird because I feel like a decade later, he is much more comfortable in his own skin in his performance, and I think could handle this pretty well. I think he could have a little bit almost like of a volatility, almost like a Farley-esque type explode out of nowhere. Like it just,
I don't know if Farley-esque is the right term there. That's a pretty big gap in energy from Brian Doyle Murray to Chris Farley.
No, but I'm saying he could use that effectively while delivering the news. I don't think Farley could sit at a Weekend Update desk.
Right.
That's it. When I'm saying Farley-esque, I mean go from I'm going to talk at this level for the majority of it and then get caught up on something and kind of go off. I think he's capable of that. I don't know. Okay. I'm not comparing him to Chris Farley.
I was about to say I was not with
That's why I said Farley-esque. So
yeah, but even the esque, that's a hell of an esque. That's why I was not on board. I get what you're saying when you've laid it out, but my gut reaction is like, what the fuck are you talking about? I got you.
For those that don't remember, in one of the previous podcasts, I mentioned one of my coolest celebrity interactions was me and my friends at a West Hollywood bar when Brian Doyle Murray bought a shot. So maybe I just will never say a bad thing about him. So maybe that's what I'm trying to cover. Regardless.
Fine. Fair enough.
Regardless, so, I'm going fake news for him. I don't know where you're at.
Yeah.
It's not good. I mean, you can probably put him ahead of Rocket and Matthias if you want,
yeah,
but that's about it.
I was debating if
there was just nothing redeemable about it, right? Like it was boring and he stumbled over it and he just wasn't as...
You're absolutely right.
I don't know.
And the only reason he ranks above them is he actually got a full season. So as opposed to them who got fired and mismatched and thing. Yeah, it's funny that we're this far into the show, though. Like, we're into the, 12th year at this... No, not 12th. That's 7th year. We're into the 7th year at this point. What the hell am I thinking? And then there's more bad than good at this point. Just because those 80s years were rough for Weekend Update especially, obviously.
The tide is turning soon enough. Not super soon, but soon enough.
Moving on from Brian Doyle Murray, however, we move to, I believe, season 8. 8 to 10 are Saturday night news. They're still away from Weekend Update, but they at least had a consistent anchor for the first part in Brad Hall, husband to Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
Correct.
So he took on the desk in, I believe, the 82 season. He ran through most of the second. He got about 2 years. Am I correct there? Did you have that looked up? I think it was 2 seasons.
I think you're right. I don't know if it was all of the second season. That's the thing I wasn't sure of.
I thought he did more for some reason than when I was looking at it, because seasons 8, 9, and 10, I realized, like, it's tough to talk about all 3 of these years without talking about them all at once. because
It's
we
through
have
most of 83 seasons. So yeah, so 1.7.
that said, Brad Hall was long enough in the chair to get his own entry before what we'll go to next.
Mhm.
I think he ranks at least as an ignorant slut or into really simply because he kind of returned it to feeling a little bit more like Weekend Update again. Regardless of the name change, having seen his stuff, the show was improving. We're into the Eddie Murphy era. He's doing really well. The show is starting to feel like Saturday Night Live again. It's having confidence again. The fact that they would bring someone on, the same person every week, to do a news segment again with the same tropes as Update, and the managed to hang on to it for as long as he did, that at least gets him above fake news, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, I think absolutely. The interesting thing about this is watching a lot of these and trying to remember the TV watching nature of the time, right? How we were consuming television. That everybody was watching whatever the 6 o'clock news on 3 different networks, and there weren't that many channels. There wasn't cable, or very, very limited cable at this point. And that was the one thing I noticed. I watched 2 different Saturday Night Newses with Brad Hall to kind of get a vibe for his delivery and how he was going. And I felt like the jokes were laid out and kind of long. That was the thing that surprised me the most, is that I didn't feel as many one-liners with it. He would start with one thing and then build off it a couple times. And that's kind of the way. I mean, the attention span was longer then. I mean, let's be honest. There was no social media. There's no multiple screens. There's no all that other stuff. You're just kind of watching what's there, so you can develop something. You can let it go. And so that is the nature of the times. Plus, with everybody watching these major news networks or these major networks, people are more aware, I think, of the actual news or the world news or things ongoing. So you could do 2 to 3 jokes about something very topical from 1982, and because when I went, I was like, boy, this is just going on forever about, it was some dictator's eyebrows that had died. And I'm just like, good Lord. But if that's what's in the news, in the newspapers and making the nightly news, that's probably what everybody's talking about. So there is something to it. And I think, like you said, him bringing that back to this a little bit, I don't want to call him like disheveled, but he always never, to me, felt like he was kind of sitting there not comfortable in his own skin while he was reporting it, which is still fine. I don't know if it was a conscious choice, but that's what it always felt like watching what he was doing. So I mean, I could be, because I talked about context with Chevy, so I got to be fair. And I think really is a possibility here. It may be in the low end of really, but
Interesting.
but I can't argue with ignorant slut.
You make it some really good points to where, like, if I were to argue against really, it's not a vitriolic argue. It's like it's not a, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. I don't feel informed enough maybe to pop it up to really, or maybe I didn't laugh enough to pop it up to really, but
so that's a good point though, but just because I gave my own internal justification for why I wasn't laughing. So ultimately we have to have that as part of our tiering, right? Like, I think that brings it back down to ignorant slut. Like, there we go. We had a robust discussion about it, but I think you're right. After you bringing that up, that made me realize that I could talk a lot about why I thought this was better than the fake news, but is not necessarily a really standard.
And you're absolutely right, because I could talk all day long about how fascinating I think the behind-the-scenes choices are, from Rocket to the era we'll go through next. And I love hearing all about the decisions and the things. But if we're talking about the on-air product, it's not funny.
Sure. Yeah.
So, but Brad Hall does his 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. And then something weird happens. The segment really falls off. And this is what I call the guest star era. Although it kind of is 2 eras over the next 1.5 years, going through, I think, the end of season 8, season 9, and season 10. The segment stays. Saturday Night News stays, but they decide to go with a whole bunch of rotating celebrity guest hosts. Sometimes they're hosting the episode, and I think sometimes they're not even hosting the episode, right?
Right.
They just bring them in. I was looking for the list. I can't find it. Now I have it. Do you have the list handy for
I
some
do.
of these?
I got it right in front of me. So This started with in January of '84.
Okay.
So once I think Brad Hall left the show. I think that's why part of
Okay.
it as well. But it started with Don Rickles, which I did not find. I would be curious to see. I
Yeah.
would feel like that was just him doing his bit, but most of them are hosts, unless I say otherwise. These are people that came to host the show.
Okay.
Robin Williams did it.
Hmm.
Joe Piscopo did it once, which is something.
While he was a cast member still?
Well, he was a cast member, yeah. And I remember he always, with Brad Hall, would usually be the sports guy. That's usually how they did it. He was doing sports updates, but then I guess he anchored the one time.
By the way, quick
Billy-
aside,
Yep.
this is, I don't know when we will talk about him again. Maybe we'll do another SNL topic. Having rewatched a lot of 80s stuff recently, I think Joe Piscopo gets a real bad rap. There's a reason that he was on as long as Eddie Murphy. There's a reason he was the only one to also not get fired with Eddie Murphy. I don't know why, how he became the punchline that he did, and he really did. But Joe Piscopo gets a fucking bad rap. He did some really good work on us.
Pretty skilled performer on the show, yeah, for sure.
I feel bad for him because I can't understand in hindsight what he did wrong for everyone to turn on him.
I think he leaned so much into that Sinatra thing and how Sinatra, he would always tell anybody that would listen that Sinatra thought his impression was the best. And it's kind of like, all right.
Okay. So obviously I wasn't young enough, or I was too young to know any of that at the time. All with hindsight, I know he became a joke, but I am not, having not properly lived through it, I couldn't really tell you why. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
Likewise. So
you were saying, where's some of the other guests?
So then this is all hosts from here on out. So it goes Billy Crystal, Edwin Newman, who I don't know who that is, Michael Douglas, George McGovern, and then Edwin Newman again.
Again?
And they also brought him back the following year.
He can't be a host, can he?
He was a host once. I did not go in depth to figure out who on earth that is. Is he like an actual? Oh, he was an actual newscaster. So okay, so they were trying to lean into this. He was okay. He was an NBC News guy. Okay, so they pulled somebody over from NBC News because they were in the building. I'm sure that's
understood.
Part of how somebody who was recognizable on NBC News, and so okay, that's the Saturday Night News component of it. I was pretty sure that's what.
Oh, he was in Spies Like Us, apparently, playing himself. How do I not remember him? I love that movie.
Michael Douglas, which I was not able to find. I was curious about that one just to see. Like, I feel like he could have pulled that off.
Did you say Ed Asner? I watched the Ed Asner one. I did watch the Ed Asner.
We're not there yet. So I'm still in season 9, and George McGovern was right after Michael Douglas. You go back into season. Now we're into season 10.
The celebrity year.
Right. Billy Crystal actually did. Well, they brought him in early '84, right?
So I looked into this. So when he hosted the show once in '84 and did Update. When he became a cast member and he did Update, he didn't host that as himself. He did Update as Fernando.
Yeah, I don't know if you found the one that I found. It was not funny.
That's funny because those bits were usually pretty good, but maybe not during Weekend Update.
I was very surprised. It was just I think I'm so accustomed to everything being so quick hitting these days because of social media, because of the way that jokes hit, that they're just longer, continuous jokes, and people had more patience for that back then. But yeah, it's so yes, the All-Star. What are we calling season 10? The All-Star year?
Hang on, I got it here. I didn't actually look it up, but I just found, I think, the Saturday Night News with Fernando segment you're talking about. Pause for you and I just so we can watch it because we can't include this here. I need to see what you're talking about. Okay, so we paused and we watched about 90 seconds of a 4-minute segment. And I instantly knew what I wanted to say about that. Fernando is great hosting Fernando's Hideaway. When it's a sketch tailored to him, when it was Billy Crystal as Fernando just talking at the camera, just doing the bits with no one reacting around him, in a void, it was painful. It was such a different vibe.
It got worse. I don't know. You know, you only watched 90 seconds of that, so
I couldn't take any more of it. I didn't want to watch any more of it.
yeah.
Woof.
So that's yeah. So and so that one not great. The I'll just rip through the rest of the guest star list here. So Bob
Yeah.
Uecker, who was a host, rest in peace, just recently.
Mhm.
Jesse Jackson, Edwin Newman again. Like he's in the building, so it's probably like if the host didn't want to do it, they probably just pulled him. George Carlin did it, which would probably be interesting. I wonder if he threw a little hippy dippy weatherman in there, but
Also, because when he hosted, quote unquote, the first show, he didn't do anything with the cast. He did 3 monologues and left. He was in
Yep.
no sketches. He did no bits. I actually didn't realize he had come back in this era. I should seek that episode out to see
Yep.
what he actually does on the show for real.
And then the final guest star host, who was also, or guest star Weekend Update anchor, who was also the host, was Ed Asner, the one you're referencing.
Oh, that was the
'cause
last one. Okay. Wow.
and then Christopher Guest takes it over, and I might be getting ahead of myself if you have him as one of them. But
No, we talked about this. That's
okay.
all part
Yep.
of this guest star
Yep.
era. Because he only did, I think, 8 episodes. The season
Correct.
ended, and then he was out. So I would put him in the guest star era.
Yep.
I'd asked if he would be his own thing, but I don't think even if he was, he got enough time to, I don't know, forge his own identity, as
He's
it were.
still within the guest star era, but he is the most consistent of it, as he took over in December of '84 and took it to the remainder of season 10 before,
Yeah.
Infamously him, Billy Crystal, and Martin Short all left.
So, well, you say left. They got fired. So they all got very much fired. So,
Diplomat, remember?
here's my question then. There's a lot of up and down in there, probably a lot more down. If you have the guest stars, the Fernandos, the Christopher Guests, where are you putting this?
You said you watched the Ed Asner one. I did not. What was your takeaway from that? Okay. Your face already tells me.
For the audio-only people, I was less than enthused.
Yeah.
It was unimpressive. And I only saw him out. I saw that one out because I thought he would be maybe the best of the bunch in just his delivery with his, like maybe he would handle it. It was fine. It was fine. It wasn't very good. It was fine.
So, I think this could be above fake news, though. I think it's at the end of You Ignorant Slut, maybe.
This isn't a no. It's a why. Talk me through it.
Because I think there was hope, for lack of a better term. I would think about this with Charles Rocket. If you tune into him the following week after seeing him be boring as fuck,
Mhm.
and you're like, this isn't going to get better, and it doesn't for a couple straight weeks, you see somebody new who actually has some sort of charisma, there's a little bit of at least hope.
I see what you're saying, because my thought was you're right, because I was thinking, how could it be hope? They've given up on the segment. But if you're training the audience that you're going to get the host every week, you're now, much like the monologue, anticipating what will they bring to this segment.
Yeah.
I could see that. So
That doesn't mean it's good. It just means it's slightly above the worst.
you've talked me into it. It is currently at the end of You Ignorant Slut. I'm in.
All right.
I'm in.
Finally.
Yes, you've done it. But
We're through that crap.
because now finally we are back to Weekend Update. We're back to Lorne Michaels.
Let's
We're
go.
back to the show getting good. For the longest tenured solo host, we have since surpassed him with some duos. But 85 to 91, starting in season 11, Dennis Miller. And boy, it's going to be tough to do this without a little politics talk, but the Dennis Miller here is a hell of a lot different than the Dennis Miller now. Do you get the impression the Dennis Miller here would hate the Dennis Miller of today?
He was so much sharper, obviously, in his youth, that he wasn't scared of anything, and so it feels so much tamer now.
Yeah, and because this isn't a Democrat-Republican thing,
No.
Dennis Miller in the 80s and early 90s felt like he was an anarchist. He
Yeah.
was out for the funny, he'll tear anybody down. Maybe it's because it doesn't feel that way now. Now it actually feels
Right.
like, despite what he may say, he feels like he's protecting something or softer.
He's got a little bit of greatest hits going on to him now. One of my favorite things about Dennis Miller is he was willing, not often, but to kind of take it back at him every once in a while.
Oh,
The
yeah.
the bits with him and Dana Carvey as him are really funny, and especially the one, I think it's from the Christmas episode where Dana Carvey and Tom Hanks all sing Jingle Bells as three Dennis Millers. It's really, really good. Like, and so the fact he's willing to do that in addition to, and this just happens to be the fact that it coincides with Dana Carvey coming on set and a lot of other really, really good recurring Weekend Update characters. But Dennis was great about setting that up, or but he could hold his own at the same time. That, it's, you never felt like it's only Dennis up there. It was just like Dennis is bigger than this set, just because he again, he wasn't scared of anything. And I can't say enough good things about Dennis Miller as a Weekend Update host.
Agreed. So a lot of like the criteria that I was thinking of for this entire list, I realize a lot of it is based off what the show became, what Weekend Update became here on.
Yeah.
Because even though the original era, a lot of it's still in the DNA, obviously, of today, what Weekend Update is now really owes to Dennis Miller's Weekend Update, even to this day. It's got the wit about it, the pacing, everything about it is because of Dennis Miller's return to form of Weekend Update.
I think we're on the same page.
There was some criteria I was thinking of when I mentioned about, well, if you're looking at the era as a whole, you also have to think about all their, recurring bits and their players and their jokes. And I realized that there's a little bit of that in the first 5 years. There's none of that in the 80s. This is where you can start judging an era by its I don't know, accessories, as it were. Who do you have to play with? Who are your friends? Who's showing up all the time? That starts here.
And Dennis gifted, obviously, with, I mean, he's an amazing performer, but gifted with the fact that he's got Dana Carvey and
John Lovitz, Phil Herman.
I mean, yeah, he's got these amazing people that can come and play characters that just pitch in for 2 minutes or whatever and hit it out of the park, and just, it makes everything gets elevated.
Dennis Miller introducing Frankenstein as that sentence shouldn't work, and that sentence is classic. It's fantastic. What an era! Tommy Flanagan. While he had his own couple of sketches, he really shined as an update person interacting with Dennis Miller.
Sure, that's a liar, right?
Yes,
Tommy
exactly.
That's the ticket.
Pathological symptoms. There's not much else we can say. I assume this is that's the news. Rightfully so.
My first one.
The first one up at the very tippy top. And listen, when we talk about it, I get why Chevy's at Pleasant Tomorrow, and I get that Jane and Dan are at Pleasant Tomorrow, and they belong there. But neither one of them even came close to getting into That's the News. We get it, and they belong where they're at. They really do. But they did not even get close to really hitting that line.
And I always got a kick too about how Dennis seemed more delighted the more kind of convoluted or whatever the joke, and then when the audience went along with it. So like you had to have a little bit of cerebral nature to it to follow along with what he was doing, because he's just as smarter than everybody in the room. But when he noticed that people were coming along for the ride, like he was very much just the Pied Piper of the audience in that regard.
Well said. Moving on, however, to Mr. Kevin Nealon, who, I gotta tell you,
I like better than most, or I like him more than others do. I think after reading a bunch of different takes on him.
It's interesting because he was the first Weekend Update anchor I have conscious memories of for me.
You know what? That's probably it for me too. Yeah.
He took over, I think, in 91, which meant I was 8, which is the first time I'm being allowed probably within that couple year period to stay up to watch a Saturday Night Live, to special occasion, whatever. I know I was technically alive for several of the others, but this is the one. This was my original, so maybe that's why I remember. I also, probably because of Comedy Central reruns, thought he had a longer run than he did. He really did. And apparently he asked to step down because he wanted to go back to sketch performing, which is crazy because he only did another year and then he left the show anyway. He actually didn't get canned. He left the show on his own after another year. he's very dry. He's
Mhm.
fun, but he is. Help me get to the words I'm trying to say here as I make this sound. He is good, but he is not the draw of his weekend update. If Dennis Miller was
No,
the
he's the
draw of
ultimate. He's the straight man, right?
yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I was hesitant to say exactly that, but yes, those are yes. If Dennis Miller was the draw of his update and Norm's the draw of his update, Kevin Nealon was the ringmaster around whom all the crazy people circled, and he got out the occasional acerbic joke.
Not exactly like Brian Doyle Murray. He would fumble over his line. Sometimes he wasn't the
Yes.
cleanest, I think, with deliveries, but I think he, again, benefited from a lot of great update characters alongside him coming in. This is when Sandler really started to shine.
I was going to say Sandler and Nealon are. I remember mostly Adam Sandler with Kevin than anybody
Mhm.
else.
Sure.
Kevin Nealon and Adam Sandler.
Opera Man, yeah.
Opera Man, the songs, Cajun Man.
Yeah. The Halloween thing.
The
I'm
Halloween
crazy
thing,
guy under the desk, you
they're
know, all those.
they're all Kevin Nealon. It's
Yeah.
crazy. And
David
then
Spade too. So like,
David
I mean, you
Spade, a
think
little
about
bit of Farley, Bennett Brower, although I remember one or two of those with Norm after. But
okay,
still.
yeah.
But for the most part, you think of that era and you think of Kevin Nealon. But we're talking so much around him. How do you rank him? Although we're not ranking him, we're ranking this era. So am I going back and forth here?
My initial reaction, and you tell me if
Yeah,
you
yeah.
think it's too high, is Germans love it. That's what I'm thinking.
Uh,
Is that too high?
I don't know. I was going back and forth. I feel like yes, but I can be talked into it. And if it's too high, he's at the cusp on the very edge of injured now. You know, and the
Right.
thing is to get ahead, right? And I know we're going to reorganize and we can shift. There's only there's like two teams coming up, two entries coming up after Kevin Nealon. And that's a lot of the show that I don't like, or that I like a lot more than Kevin Nealon is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
I'm stumbling over my words. I worry Germans love it is too high, but I could be talked into it. What if we place him there now, and if we're reorganizing at the end, and he's at the end of Germans Love It, and we feel like it doesn't match with what else is there, we move him down.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So for now, he will be in Germans Love It. But if we are reorganizing, if we're analyzing, he might be the first one to get the shunt. He might get kicked down to the curb. Because after Kevin Nealon, however, is Mr. Norm MacDonald. All-timer. Listen, we've quoted Norm outside of this. We'll quote Norm moving forward. This was, as a 10-year-old, was this my introduction to bits that I felt like this and Conan happening in like the same year. Like Conan took over late night, Norm took over update, all like that same fall. And my brain was never the same. So many quotable lines that age well, that we love, that were death to the audience at the time. For everything everyone says about Norm MacDonald, for as much as we love him, for as much as the bits have aged beautifully, when you actually watch Norm's update, there is fucking crickets for a lot of it. And do you have to take that into consideration?
I don't know. It's more we talk about how Dennis Miller was fearless. And Norm was just like, I don't care.
The difference is Dennis Miller was fearless and the audience loved him. Norm was fearless and the audience enjoyed him, but they didn't love him. That's the catch. We love him. We love him now. And he got so much goodwill with everything that happened. No one wanted him fired. But if we're genuinely ranking him, I got to tell you, I feel like everyone assumed and you assumed and maybe everyone thought would be an instant that's the news. I think he's a pleasant tomorrow at best.
Wow.
I love Norm. I love what Norm has done. I think Norm is great. Tell me why is the top tier. Tell me right now. Make me believe again.
Because I'm not sure. We talk about context also, right? This is why we put Chevy as high as we did. I think some people took that very slow burn that Norm would do, and it's evident they're using it while in their time on update. They take some of Norm's tricks and are using them.
You're right.
Maybe not,
you're right.
maybe not predominantly, but I can count. I'm just looking down the list. At least 3 that are using that trick of
You're right.
a side thing. So
You're right. I think I just wanted to have the conversation.
That's a great point to put in behind Dennis, I think.
Yeah.
But I still think he needs to be. That's the news.
I think you're right. And we were probably always going to get there. I genuinely think.
No, it's a good discussion.
I was going to say, I don't think it's the instant get that everyone acts like it is, because hindsight's amazing, looking at the reality of what it was at the time.
Sure. I mean, Chris Rock is a brilliant stand-up. Everyone acknowledges that. Was he that influential on SNL? He had some great bits, but not, if we did do that tier list, I'd be curious to see where he would be, and probably not as high as everybody thinks, but we think of him so positively because of his just annihilation of the stand-up world. So, and it's just, I think it's a similar thing with Norm, right? We remember all these hilarious things, or all the show guests, whether it was on Dennis's show or whether it was on Conan O'Brien or any of these. Or Letterman. He was just an amazing guest and a hilarious individual, and we remember that. And so we sort of, what's the word? Transfix, but
Transpose?
Transpose. I'm gonna say there. Words.
No, I think you're right. And I will say, to your point, to double back, Chris Rock only got a best of because he became Chris Rock. He wouldn't have gotten a best of otherwise. It's like 10 X sketches and like one other thing. So it is what it is. So, okay. Now, I remember this man's opening lines. The next guy's opening bits. Colin Quinn. Do you remember how he opened his first update? I actually think it's the most memorable thing he ever did, because it was clever, it was smart, and then he was never as good again.
I remembered his tagline. That's all I really remembered about Colin Quinn, but
I don't remember his tagline. What is it?
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Oh, I do remember that. Yep. No, his opening bit was a rare moment where I think he did this later on in his tenure, but in the first time you ever saw him, they just come in, they don't hit the update open, he's at the desk, and he goes, do you ever go to the bar, and it's your favorite bar, but your bartender's not there, and you go, where's Joe? And they go, Joe doesn't work here anymore. And you're like, oh, I like Joe, but you really want a beer? So you just kind of sit there, and you learn this guy's name, and you're like, you're Steve? He's like, hey, I'm Steve. What do you need? Then he pauses, and he goes, I'm Steve. What can I get you? And I was like, okay, that's pretty good. But I never thought he was good after that. I never liked Colin Quinn. I really didn't think he was very good. I thought he was stilted. I thought his correspondent bits were always awkward. I didn't like him as a correspondent with Norm. I am not a fan of Colin Quinn. That said, my gut reaction is a really, because he's obviously better than everything that came in the 80s.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It was unfortunate timing too, because he's going to be always compared to following up Norm. So that's an impossible bar to hit. I really like Colin Quinn as a stand-up. So I have to push that off to the side. Like, I think he's very funny in a lot of the things that he does, in terms of he breaks down history and a lot of different things in a very interesting format. However, that's not what he did on Update.
Part of my problem with it is that, am I misremembering that in his last year, or maybe last year and a half, he did open with a monologue? Like, he would do a stand-up comedy bit, then Update would start?
Yeah.
I did not like that. I did not like that. I did not like that.
Almost like a green screen, right? Like, you stand up in front of it. Yeah.
I simply thought of that because I was waiting at that point when you said you liked him as a stand-up. I thought you were going to be like, and I liked what he did for this and that. I was like,
no, I did not care for that. His stand-up that I really liked were almost like one-man shows. They're very much more long form. They're not lent to this. Like, that's not. I feel like he got sort of pushed into this just because maybe he said he would do it, or it didn't ever feel like he was comfortable in this, and it came through on it. I think really is fine because there were some good jokes. I definitely can go back and watch one, and if I would watch an episode, I'd be like, all right, there's probably one joke in there that I laughed pretty hard at. So credit to that, and I think really is right.
Okay. There we go. Hey, and look at us. We've managed to get something in every category.
All
I'm so
right,
proud
hey.
of us. Poor Colin Quinn having to follow up in that really. But then it really does become a little bit more of a return to form, where we get our first double act since Jane Curtin and Bill Murray in the original era that stuck, because I just lied. I remembered. I just remember they tried it with Brian Doyle Murray. I completely forgot. They tried it with Brian Doyle Murray briefly.
So
but
memorable.
It stuck. Because you got a couple episodes with Rocket and Matthias, but they really tried to make it hammer with Brian Doyle Murray because he had like those two different co-hosts. I was skipping over that entirely. So
yeah,
because this also does feel like a proper throwback to the original era of the show when you get Tina Fey and Jimmy Fallon. And this saved to me Jimmy Fallon's career. Jimmy Fallon was going to be a nothing. Jimmy Fallon he eventually left to do movies that bombed. He got the talk show. The Tonight Show probably only happened because of residual goodwill from his time on Update. He was the guy that laughed and ruined sketches with Horatio Sands.
Yep.
Jimmy Fallon's career was extended. His SNL legacy was saved. He only had any residual remaining goodwill for what would come because of his time on Update. And obviously, it fucking launched Tina Fey into the stratosphere. Any insight or just yes? Sorry, I have nothing else. What do you got?
No.
You can agree with me, but I don't. That's not a very good conversation. I don't know what else to say.
It's tricky because I don't want to. I have to acknowledge the context of that.
What do you mean?
I am of how them being put on Update at this point elevated both of their careers. Obviously,
yes. Yeah,
brought them to the forefront of our awareness, which they both took off from. Like, I mean,
Tina had been head writer for a couple of years.
Sure.
This is her on-camera debut.
But they both made the most of this time. That being said, I think it is, as a performative thing, kind of sloppy. I don't think their delivery is great. I think Tina, who I like, obviously her style, her comedy, her delivery a lot of times is trying to tell us that, oh yeah, because of this, I don't like when people explain jokes, unless it's in a much drier fashion. Sometimes she'd almost giggle while she's explaining. It was not, but I will give some credit to the fact that she was obviously writing them and they were funny. But the delivery of it bothers me a little bit. And then Fallon's just constant breakups are not my favorite thing. At times they're funny. In certain instances, they're amusing.
He did it too much.
I will say, Fallon's, off to the side kind of look thing, the "you're welcome" or whatever it is, as part of a punchline, I really enjoyed. I was like, okay, that's the thing. And he brought that with him to the Tonight Show, that kind of side commentary, which is great. But I am not as high on these two as maybe others are. I would put it that way. That's why I'm withholding, because I'm not trying to be like they're shit, because they're not.
No,
obviously
I actually agree with you. And I really love what Tina Fey would go on to do. And I think her era with Amy Poehler, which is much shorter, was better.
Agreed.
And in fact, we could even rank them together. I'll just advance right now to Tina and Amy Poehler. I never really, I say it saved Jimmy Fallon. I never really liked Jimmy Fallon either way.
Yeah.
I can acknowledge that it saved him and this and that and et cetera, et cetera. But meh. And I like that it brought back Good Night and Have a Pleasant Tomorrow for the first time since the 70s. That's a delight. My favorite thing of this era that it introduced, I didn't like a lot of the side characters. Drunk Girl was overdone.
Oh, yeah.
The Update Door was okay.
And really dumb, because Jeff Richards, that's the guy's name.
Yeah,
He's such a good impressionist. Why didn't they use him for other stuff? Like
they
did during sketches, but they should have on Update.
The only recurring bit that they did regularly, and I don't remember if it continued into the next one, is I loved Chris Kattan's intentional bad reenactments of news stories. Where it was like, I think there was one where the governor slipped on some ice and they just brought him out and he went, "No!" and he fell down. And there was something about the laziness of how they did that bit got me
Yeah.
every time. There's always, gems in there somewhere.
Sure.
That said, I think it set up a lot for what we're going to get into that was better. But do you have to it was also very popular, though. Whatever we may think aside,
I
it
know.
lasted like 4.5
I
years.
introduced
It was a
context right at the
popular
beginning
run.
with Chevy, so I have to be fair
It was
in my
very
assessment of it.
popular. And if we're saying that the genesis of Dennis Miller is still being seen today, for good or for ill, this is still being seen today, because after Seth, who did have a sustained solo run, I think them going back to having a duo still harkens back to how well this did after they brought
Okay.
it back. So, I don't know. What do you think, man? Where do you want to put it?
Do we go top of Germans Love It, or does it make it all the way up to Pleasant Tomorrow? I don't like it in Pleasant Tomorrow. I'm not gonna lie to you, Mike.
No, even if people are upset with us,
Yeah.
this is our fucking list. And so
Yeah.
we're put at the top of Germans Love It. This is where we're at.
Leave some
I'm in.
comments.
Yeah.
Just
So
talk us left and right.
Ahead of
Or
Kevin
give us
Nealon.
5 stars.
Agreed. Ahead of Kevin Nealon.
Okay. Yeah.
Even though I think I would personally like Kevin Nealon more, I think overall you have to rank it ahead of Kevin.
I think so. Yeah.
But what about Tina and Amy? I feel like that became way more fun, and Amy
Yeah.
Poehler brought a great new dynamic to the show that she would keep with Seth Meyers after. But Tina and Amy, as their own thing, were charming enough. There's a reason they made a couple movies together. There's a reason they are tied together. There's a reason they've hosted award shows together. I think this was funnier, better, wittier. It was smarter. It was
I don't
smarter.
know why. And here I've been shit talking Fallon and Tina Fey and all, and not being able to necessarily keep themselves serious. Like, there's something infectious to the way Amy can't contain herself when she's reporting on something that is so funny that even it's coming through her. I don't know why it works with her. Maybe it's just certain performers, but and maybe that's just the warmth and the heart that she's able to provide to characters.
Maybe it's because she didn't do it as much.
Maybe that's true. And so when you saw it, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're along for the ride because, okay, this took somebody who was really there. Hey, yeah, okay, I'll buy that.
Yeah. So where do you rank them? Now here's the thing. If we put Tina and Jimmy at the top of Germans Love It, and we're saying that these two are better, does that crack the bottom of Pleasant Tomorrow, or is that just ahead of Germans Love It?
No, I think it's Pleasant Tomorrow back end.
I think you're right.
Yep.
And now we get into, in my mind, without saying who, I think there could be two, but there's at least one more that's the news, and everything else falls down from. So, next up we have Amy, and Mr. Seth Meyers is now part of the team. You can really see, I do like that this multi-year run over the decade, though, of there's like a little continuity from one anchor to another anchor to another anchor. They haven't done, and for good or ill, this is not the episode for this. I do think there should have been a Fire Everyone some point in the last 15 years. I think it would have been good for the show. But since they're not, you can see, at least the DNA of where we're getting to. What do you think of Amy and Seth? You got really. That's literally one of our categories. That's a pretty famous bit. But aside from that, what else are you thinking?
Big fan. I think Seth is such a talented writer, and translated so well. I mean, Jimmy found a way to utilize his talents on the Tonight Show and make it this variety show on a nightly basis that has a lot of fun, whereas Seth, I mean, basically took Weekend Update and made it his talk show. I mean, that's kind of what it feels like. So he's very comfortable in this. He's very skilled at it, and is not afraid to be silly. He does the podcast, right, with the Lonely Island guys. He's written a lot of those Lonely Island sketches, or written with them, and I think he's a great combination of it. I would put this combo in Pleasant Tomorrow, and I think ahead of Tina and Amy.
I think you're right, and I think this combo, even though it only lasted 2 or 3 years, benefits from the fact that it had the lead up to the 2008 election. Yes, I'm trying to think how to say, the start of the next season is when Seth would go by himself. But the start of the next season, I think, still had Amy for a little bit of it, because then she would have her kid and then she would leave the show. But she would stay through part of the election. So when you look at 2008, getting that election year, Sarah Palin and Obama, and the fact that they did those primetime Thursday night update specials, which have some of my favorite bits, like things that I think of from updates, a couple of those are from those specials. For such a short run of like 2.5 years of those two as a team, it feels bigger. And I would take this 2.5 years over everything that Jimmy and Tina did together.
Yeah. No arguments. I think there's a different playfulness with the two of them that isn't always there with Jimmy and Tina. I don't know. They almost, Jimmy and Tina almost kind of felt like I don't know, a little bit uncomfortable person enjoying what they were doing, but I never got the impression that Amy and Seth weren't very comfortable up on that desk.
Agreed. Oh, and by the way, we were remiss if we didn't mention that, yes, we're well aware that Horatio Sands, I think, filled in for like 3 episodes when Tina had her kid. We're
Wearing
not counting.
glasses, yeah.
We're not doing it. I just wanted to mention that before we moved on. So, yes, I would say then if we're looking at this, we have got...
I'm going to say it, Mike. I think they go ahead of Jane and Dan.
Yes, I agree. And really, I actually like them more than Chevy, but the historical context of Chevy.
Right.
I like them more than Chevy. I would personally put them ahead, but I get that we got to give him his due there.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think I'm feeling good about this so far. And now here, you tell me if I'm barking up the wrong tree, my friend. When I said I had one more, that's the news. Seth Meyers has like a 5 or 6 year run by himself with some of the best bits we'd seen. And to me, that's the news. But you tell me why I'm wrong, and I'll talk about it with you.
I don't think you're wrong. And I think the way I just talked about how at ease Seth and Amy were on the desk, Seth just exudes that confidence when he's up there and had a great interaction with all the guests. I mean, Stefan, obviously, but there are a bunch of other different, I can't think off the top of my head, recurring characters that he just would interact with. It almost was like seamlessly, right? Like he would turn and start to and address them, and they'd cut, and they would have a single shot of talking about them, and all of a sudden it became a back and forth. It wasn't just tossed to this person. He did a great job interacting with the recurring characters, having recurring bits with the recurring characters. I mean, and so I think you're right. I think that puts him above Chevy. I would still put him behind Norm.
I would too.
I think you're right with That's the News. I wasn't, when you first said that, I wasn't in it, and then the more I thought about it in a broader scape of everything, well, we said the criteria, right? Like he checks so many different boxes that ultimately, if you're, in a sports analogy, if you do everything well, you're a Hall of Famer.
And he had, and like I said, aside from just Stefan, which frankly Stefan might get him up there anyway, as that being, and you can say that it's one of those rare characters where it's an update character that works and has to work with the host, because he's come back, I think, twice without Seth there, and they have to address Seth. Like they can't not mention him, because it's an update correspondent so intrinsically tied to its host that it's just the way that it is.
Yep.
And then he was the era, he had anything Bobby Moynihan did was from this era. Drunk Uncle, Snooki, Fred Armisen's characters were here. They had Kristen Wiig's characters.
The guy that always heard something.
The Mafia doing just something. Anthony
Crispino, I think.
Crispino, he was great. I'm a big Bobby Moynihan fan, and he did a lot of great update bits, all in Seth's era. That's So, and he just, he kept it together. He steered the ship. I was good
Yeah.
with it. So I'm unless you tell me otherwise, he's going at the bottom, but that's the news.
No, I'm with you.
All right. We got 3 left. And
Okay.
considering that this is all the way back, this next one starts in 2013, I feel like we should have more than 3 left. And I've got thoughts for when we get
Crazy,
there.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Seth Meyers and Cecily Strong. Cecily was never good on Update. She did
It's
this
tough
with
because she's
Seth.
so good as a sketch performer, but
She was not the right fit for Update. She never worked for me on Update. She was, and listen, it shows the fact that all of this happened in 2014, right? You had Seth and Cecily. Seth leaves. Colin comes in. The season ends. The next season starts, and Cecily's back just as a sketch player. That's all 2014. And for that reason, though, it is technically distinct because Seth and Cecily did a run together.
yeah.
You got to rank them differently, though, because you could tell they're trying to prep Cecily as the next one, right?
Right. Sure.
This is a transitional thing for Seth. You know he's leaving. This isn't going to be a long-term partnership. How do you place that? And where do you place that? Because neither one of her tenures are very good, and I couldn't remember or tell you a thing about them.
Yeah. She does get the Seth boost. I'll give her that. And it's better than any of the crap in the early 80s. I think this is really ahead of Quinn.
Barely.
Yeah.
It's ahead of Quinn, but stays in really.
Yeah. Yep.
And I would say that.
And honestly, that's because of Seth. I mean, that's
Yes.
probably back further down if it's not.
And honestly,
If Seth Meyers isn't the partner here.
And when you move on to Cecily and Colin Jost, which lasted, let me look up here. It lasted 2 months at the end of that season. And it lasted such a short amount of time. I didn't realize Colin Jost had done this with anyone other than Michael Che.
Yeah.
I thought that just started the next year. And that was it.
Really green too.
Yeah.
So,
but that said, this is the question. Is this better than Brad Hall and the Guest Hosts, or is it worse than Brad Hall and the Guest Hosts? This 2-month era with Green. Colin
I think
Jost.
it's in between.
So Brad Hall had the confidence, and he stays ahead, and the guest hosts are shitty guest hosts, so they go in between. So
what I think.
Ignorant Slut goes Brad Hall, Cecily and Jost, and then the guests. Then it brings us to, God help us, from 2014 to now, Colin Jost to Michael Che. And let me tell you right now, I wish they'd have changed about 5 years ago. I think they do a lot of fun stuff, and there's bits I like. Who doesn't love the joke swap, right?
It's great.
The joke swap every year is fantastic.
They could just bring them back and do that every Christmas one, like, right?
Part of my problem with latter-day SNL, part of my problem with latter-day Lorne, and this is obviously as a complete outsider who knows nothing of anything, Lorne needed to do a fire everyone at least once in the last 15 to 20 years, and he hasn't. And there's this, I love Keenan. I would have gotten rid of Keenan 5 or 6 years ago. When Keenan went and did that sitcom, get rid of him. He does the same shtick every bit. He hasn't brought anything to the show in forever.
Or let him take over. I mean, like,
I don't want Keenan taking over the show. He's not Lorne. No. What has ever given you that strikes me as one of those people who thinks actors write their own dialogue. That's like some do, but that's like forgetting the right. I don't see Keenan as Lorne producer type unless I'm missing something.
He's a guy that's been in that business for so long, the sketch comedy business, whether it's, I mean, you can argue that, Keenan and Kel or all that wasn't great. If you want to argue that, that's fine.
And I like those, but I don't want that. If I'm saying get rid of people and have something, I don't want to replace it with Keenan where the sensibilities would stay exactly the same.
You think?
I do. I don't know. That's just me. Maybe. I don't know. Sorry. But we're not here to talk about all that. Not all that the show or all that to the topic. I did
or
not
what's
do
up
that
with
on
that
purpose.
or any of that stuff.
Yes.
So
I don't want to, we got to get back to this.
yes.
I really do love Keenan as a cast member. I am just, of the thought that some of these people have been on the show too fucking long. And to dial that back to Weekend Update, this Weekend Update team has been going for too long.
Yep.
And tell me where they rank because of that. Have they gotten better? Yes. Have I ever thought that they were top tier? No. They have great moments. I've never thought they were top tier. I do not understand. Maybe that's why I don't understand that they've lasted this.
It is stunning, right? Like where you sit there and you go, okay, well, I know that Joseph and Shay is going to be a long time, but you didn't think, I mean, that's what, 11 seasons, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a long time.
Ridiculous.
Uh,
So here's the catch, right?
yeah.
This is what I would say. For longevity and joke swap alone, that pushes them all. And this is before further conversation. This is before further analysis, which we will have. Longevity and joke swap alone gets them to the top of End Your Not. They skip all the bullshit.
Yep.
They go to the very tippy top of End Your Not. That is not necessarily where they're staying. I am not ready to have a deeper discussion. But as our last grouping, all of that aside gets them all the way to the top of the middle. Now, where do we put them?
I'm willing to move them up to Germans Love It because of, we talk about all the criteria. Jost and Che are very comfortable interacting with the recurring characters. And in many instances, they help and elevate. The Leslie Jones stuff was hilarious with Colin Jones.
The Sarah Sherman stuff and the similar vibe.
It's great. I always think it's going to get old, and somehow I still find myself laughing at it. Like Sarah Sherman is a just fascinating performer, just because I think that her stuff's. In my head, I'm like, this is one note, and I still laugh. Like it's probably not fair to the way she's performing, but
and to your point, you're actually talking me into placing them a little higher, simply because, as much as I'm tired of the sameness, they do have a lot of recurring bits that the audience know and appreciate. Probably because of that.
I mean, you think all the way back to whether you liked it or not, the Vanessa Bayer, Jacob, the little Jewish boy, was always the thing with Che, and Che was almost treating that as if he was trying to lead a child along in a television interview, and just the way that Vanessa Bayer's character would just no sell and move on to what she. I mean, there are parts to that you have to buy into the two of them on that desk and what they're doing in order to buy into the whole bit. And I think there's something to be said for that. Again, they're not just shoving off and throwing to the recurring characters. I mean,
I'm going to give you the full breakdown. This is my pitch.
Yep. Okay.
We moved to the top of Germans Love It, ahead of Tina and Jimmy and Kevin Nealon.
Yes. I think that's right.
But they stay beneath. The end of Pleasant Tomorrow is Tina and Amy.
And I think that's right, because we have to, if we're giving context to everything, we have to give context to Wearing Out Your Welcome.
Yes. And they have, in my view. For as good as they can, I'm ready for a change. But that's everybody. Let's recap and let's organize, shall we?
All right. Yes.
At the very tippy top, on the top level, that's the news. Currently, we have, in order, Dennis Miller, Norm Macdonald, Seth Meyers as the top three. Any changes in placement there for you?
No, I like that.
Me too. I think that's the right way. There are a lot of people I think are going to be like, Norm is better. And I think there are some people who could be angry that we put Seth on that same level. But I stand by all of that, in my view. And
through the discussion of it, I think it comes out. That's where it came out for me. Initially, when we had first looked at all these different like tiers and looked at all the people, I would have never thought I would have put Seth that high. But it's when you tick off the criteria by criteria, it's really interesting to see. Yes, that's where he belongs.
And Dennis and Norm are so close together, but Dennis edges out for being a little wittier and more well-received, I think.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, we're giving a little bit of weight to who trailblazes, right? Yep. And Weekend Update is as we know it, thanks to Dennis Miller.
And now, when we move down to the next level, you had mentioned earlier that somebody, and I'm thinking you were going to say Norm, but we didn't actually say it, owed a lot to Chevy Chase. Was it Norm, or were you going for Dennis?
I was saying actually Kevin Nealon. So I think I think his delivery, and I know the subliminal stuff was things that he came up with, but I felt like that was a lot of similar delivery between the two of them.
Unexpected. But top of Pleasant Tomorrow, the next tier down, in order, Chevy Chase, Amy and Seth, Jane Curtin and Dan Aykroyd, Tina and Amy Poehler. Any thoughts? I think that's.
I think I'm willing. I'm
Now, what do
even
you got?
willing to move. I'm even willing to move Seth and Amy ahead of Chevy, but that would be the only switch. But there's so much weight I want to give to Chevy for being the
I
originator.
can't do it. Yeah, I can't do it for that reason. I would probably like them
it's a
personally.
personal preference in that regard. Yeah, you're right.
And I laughed enough at Chevy's stuff and with the history of it all. I can't place him below them. He has to be the top of that tier.
Okay. Then I'm on board with that.
Otherwise, you're okay with it? Okay, great.
Yep.
Next tier down. Germans love it. We got Chost and Che. Then you got Tina and Jimmy. Then you got Kevin Nealon. Any concerns?
I think that's right.
Yep. Next tier down from that, and you're not. You got solo Jane Curtin and Jane with Bill Murray. I think we're good there too.
Yep.
Next tier down from that, you got Really with Seth and Sesame. And then Colin Quinn. Next, we move down another tier. You ignorant slut. You're going to get a lot of 80s drugs, except for one here. But the top of the 80s drugs, you got Brad Hall, who at least gave it a go, put in a good run. It is what it is. Next down, you got Cecily and Colin Jost, strictly because they only lasted 2 months. Colin was green. Cecily was never great. It's short. It is what it is.
Yep.
But that does rank ahead the guest star era. It's still better than the guest star era because at least they were trying.
Right.
Then the last tier, the worst tier, the fake news. The best of the worst, you got Mr. Brian Doyle Murray. Then you got Charles Rocket and Gil Mathias. And then, by himself, Charles Rocket. That is Weekend Update since 1976, ranked and organized by us. Any final thoughts, Randy?
I think this is a really interesting exercise because when you just look at it by checking out all the different duos and single anchors, I would have thought things played out a lot differently. But I mean, this is the reason we do a tier list. But there's a few surprises here that elevated higher and lower than I would have anticipated.
Agreed. And once you start really talking through it, I didn't think about. I really thought some of the Jane Curtin stuff would rank higher than it did, just because of her longevity and the era. I thought, even though I didn't like him, I thought you would fight for Colin Quinn to go higher, and I'm glad you didn't, because I didn't want to have that fight.
I had to separate what I like about Colin Quinn versus what I like about Weekend Update Colin Quinn. So
okay.
Once I did that, it was a lot easier to, I think, place him appropriately.
All right, well said. But with that, I think that's about everything, and we'll be wrapping this up. We'll hit the social media plugs. What do you say? So, Instagram.
TikTok's still around, right?
It is. Again, we'll keep sussing it out. We'll see how it goes. But Instagram, TikTok, Where Do These Guys Friends? Mike Barcode, MikeBarcode, Where Do These Guys Friends at gmail.com. Leave 5-star reviews, like, subscribe, all the positive stuff, all the interactions. We love comments. We love talking, both for the algorithm and because we like getting into it with people. It's fun to have a little back and forth, a little diatribe. It makes it more entertaining. But, we can't force you. I'd fucking force you if I could. You leave a fucking comment.
What?
I'd turn on you like that.
You made me, retreat.
Yeah. Randy, send me an email. Leave a comment.
So then I didn't do it the second time. Whoops.
Leave a comment.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I got him. Now, don't let me turn that on you all. So, with that, I will give you the final word to a terror-stricken Randy who I have beaten down into submission.
That's the news, and we are out of here. Goodbye, everybody.